Hey, this is episode number 58 of Gen X Amplified, and today we are going to talk all about Gen X women and midlife, because I will be having a conversation with Ada Calhoun, who is the author of the recent book and New York Times bestseller, Why We Can't Sleep, Women's New Midlife Crisis, which is an expansion of her 2017 essay that was featured on Oprah.com, which went super viral and named the 55th most read story on the entire internet in 2017. So, are you ready? Let's do it.
Studies just made it so much clearer to me why our generation is in this predicament. And it's not because we didn't work hard. It's not because we weren't smart. It was beyond our control, a lot of it. And
Welcome to Gen X Amplified, where we bring you inspirational and entertaining conversations with successful Gen X leaders and entrepreneurs.
This is the show created just for you. The powerful generation between the boomers and millennials to help you amplify your story,
Maximize your impact,
and become Gen Exceptional in business and in life.
Now, here's your host, Adrian Porter.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gen X Amplified. This is the podcast dedicated to showcasing and amplifying the very powerful and exceptional generation between those brilliant boomers and magnificent millennials. And as always, thank you so much for listening, for subscribing to the podcast, and for championing this movement. I really appreciate it. So I'm so excited to have this conversation today because my guest is a best-selling author, highly acclaimed journalist, and fellow passionate Gen X champion. She is the author of the memoir, Wedding Toast I'll Never Give, which was named an Amazon Book of the Month and one of the top 10 memoirs of 2017 by W Magazine. And she is also the author of St. Mark's is Dead, which was called one of the best books of 2015. But it was in the year 2017 when my guest decided to pen an article titled The New Midlife Crisis, Why and How It's Hitting Gen X Women. And this article was featured on Oprah.com. You know, that lady you may have heard of. But this article took the world by storm. It went super viral, which led her to her latest book titled Why We Can't Sleep, Women's New Midlife Crisis, which is an expansion of this story and has been called a generation-defining exploration of the new midlife crisis facing Gen X women and the unique circumstances that have brought them to this point. So without further ado, please welcome my Gen X exceptional guest, the wonderful and nocturnal Ada Calhoun. Ada, how are you doing?
hi, I'm doing good.
I'm so glad to have you on the show. I remember that year. I remember in 2017 when I came across your post, obviously for what I do and the passion that I have of everything Gen X. And I said, this is a great article. And I am a male, but I felt it.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of things in that article on the book that apply to both women and men.
Oh, they certainly do. And being a 40-something Gen Xer, I thought it was very compelling. I actually forwarded over to a lot of my female Gen X friends as well, and male friends, but I tell you, it was a great post, very insightful.
Aw, thanks. And
I remember seeing on the circle and other things, especially at the Milken Institute, and that was a very interesting conversation.
It was, wasn't it?
Yeah, we'll get into it a little bit, but it was a very enlightening, interesting conversation. But I have you here on Gen X Amplified, and I would love to start off, Ada, by you just briefly just talking about your journey that led you to writing that article and led you to writing this book, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's great that you're calling attention to Gen X because we are really neglected, as you know, in many ways. So I grew up in New York City. I grew up in the East Village. I was born in 1976. Came up in kind of a bohemian household. And then I worked at magazines in high school. I worked at Spin in like prime Gen X glory era, like early 90s.
Yes.
And then I went to UT Austin for college. I majored in Sanskrit, of all things, and but I worked at the Austin Chronicle there. And then when I moved back to New York, I worked at Vogue, a New York Magazine, and some other places. And I went out on my own doing books in 2009. And then you mentioned the books already. And then I was just having a crummy summer, and I felt like my career was over. And then this editor at Oprah.com called and asked me to do a story about our generation, and here we are.
That just like that, right? It went from Bananarama Land to Cruel Summer. Gen Xers, you know what I'm talking about. See, okay, so writing this article for Oprah.com. So what was it? Did they tell you why did they reach out to you specifically to pen this particular article? And actually, quickly, did the article start off in that way, or did it evolve into something more?
I think it's a combination. So the editor who called me, her name is Mamie Healy, and she is she's been in magazines for a long time and was just super smart about the demographic, the readership. And she just said, like, listen, something's going on, like with me and my friends, with these other people that, you know, are writing in. There's just something's going on with this generation of women. Right. We need to figure out what it is. And then she gave me a couple months and let me just do a ton of research and a ton of interviews to try to get the best stories and the best studies to explain us to ourselves. And then when it came out, though, I think both of us were kind of shocked by how much it struck a nerve.
Yeah, it certainly did. And you mentioned too, kind of the impetus to them seeking you out and you kind of having that cruel summer. Now, when you said it was crummy, what exactly do you mean by crummy? What were you feeling?
It was awful. What I mean is it was awful. I was just like, I had a ton of credit card debt. I had all this work fall through. I was just broke, and I felt so much pressure because I was the breadwinner and I had this family, and I just felt like I felt overwhelmed, and like I was never going to do another book again, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I tried to find a job like you do. Right. And I hadn't tried to find like a full-time job in a while, but I was like, oh, I've done books, like no problem. I'll get an editing job in 2 seconds. I was very confident until I started sending resumes out. And then I became increasingly less confident because I found nothing. There was nothing. And I felt just so overwhelmed. So luckily this story came along. And one of the reasons you asked why she called me, and part of it was that she had read my book prior, which was about marriage. And she was like, I think you are maybe having a midlife crisis. And I was like, no, it's not a midlife crisis. But then as I was doing the article, I was like, oh, maybe she's onto something. Yeah,
and I've read the book. I couldn't put it down. And for those of you who may not have read it, so she actually Ada goes into some detail during this crummy summer. And you are such a writer. I love your style. I just want to give you kudos. I love the pictures you paint with words. I remember that line about this summer and about you feeling miserable. And just like many people like us, Gen Xers, mid-career professionals that are struggling and having so many things coming at them and in this traffic jam of life, professionally, we get laid off sometimes, we lose our jobs, and we'll say, we'll just get another job to fall back on, especially those who are entrepreneurs or are freelancers. And I remember you said in the book, I'll get a job to fall back on. No big deal. But you said you realized there was no one there to catch you, wanted to catch you. But I could see you falling back and thinking, hey,
it's what it felt like. Yeah.
I have all this experience. I'm sure I'm seasoned. No big deal. Right. And so true for many of us. We get out there and for so many different reasons, it's the opportunities aren't just there, and it makes us feel even worse. And you also mentioned in the book that it wasn't you weren't just by yourself. I mean, you had a family, you had a child, you're married, and so there are so many dynamics there. So they reach out to you, you wrote this article, and was during the process of writing, Ava, would you consider it to be therapeutic as well? Like you said you didn't know that there wasn't this massive dynamic that was felt so many different other women. During the writing, during the interviewing and the research, was it therapeutic for you, or was it obvious? Was it scary?
It was a total revelation. It was amazing to me. I mean, it was like these stories I was hearing from other women. They were so familiar. They resonated so much with what I was going through. And these studies just made it so much clearer to me why our generation is in this predicament. And it's not because we didn't work hard. It's not because we weren't smart. It was beyond our control, a lot of it. And I found that just hugely liberating.
Wow. So let's unpack that even more, because I'm sure there are people listening in that are going through this, or have gone through it. And obviously part of my mission and purpose is to help everyone of any age feel empowered, especially us Gen Xers. And so when you went through this, let's talk about some of the stories and talk about some of the commonalities. And I know one of the things that I studied, I'm sure you're familiar with your research, is that this thing called the happiness curve, right? The U curve of happiness. And I talk about it all the time. And it's actually my mission to flatten the U curve, but to get out of that malaise and into mastery, or at least first we acknowledge that it does happen. For those of you who don't know, who are listening in, that there have been studies that have been championed by a lot of economists that throughout life, you start off at this high of happiness when you're born, right? Everything is great, it's new. And then your level of happiness starts to plummet as you get older and older and older. And guess when it totally nadirs and at this lowest point, everyone? In your 40s, right?
No surprise there.
No surprises. But then it peaks again and it goes back up in your 50s and everyone's like, hey, just wait, it'll get better. But what about now? And so during this research, you start to realize that the happiness curve is real. The crisis is real. What are some of the most immediate things you heard, Ada, that other people were going through that, number one, you were going through as well, and number two, you were shocked?
Yeah. So what I kept hearing again and again was just this sense of being overwhelmed, because a lot of women specifically were working full-time stressful jobs while also doing most of the caregiving in the family for children and aging parents, while going through perimenopause and while having all this stimulation on their phone of like breaking news alerts and demands from bosses and obligations, and it just seemed to be leading to a lot of anxiety and a lot of sleeplessness, and I related to that quite a bit.
Wow. And just to unpack that further, specifically with the target of your book, Ada, the audience, and it's very specific. It's for women. It's called Women's New Midlife Crisis. And even the article on Oprah.com doesn't mean that men aren't going through this as well. But I think what's interesting, and I would agree with you, that there's a different phenomenon that hits Gen X women versus Gen X men. Would you agree? And you mentioned kind of the expectations that are placed upon women versus men. Can you shed some light on that and why you decided to really focus primarily on women? And when you did, what are some of the differences or expectations when it came to going through this malaise and crisis that hits men or women differently than men?
Yeah. So as you know, like men and women were both affected by the decline in job stability and by all the bad luck that Gen X hit at every turn in our careers and economic well-being. So, you know, a lot of us graduated into recession and, you know, hit the dot-com bust and hit the housing crisis at the exact wrong moment. So that affects both of us. But I think what I kept hearing from the women that I interviewed was that they had all these expectations for themselves growing up. They thought they were going to be able to, as they said, have it all effortlessly. And I think a lot of the messages we got as young girls were meant to inspire us. And I think they did. But they also created this very unrealistic expectation that we were going to have it all without real consequence to our sleep and joy. And also that it would not be very, very, very hard. So, you know, I talked to a lot of women who, for example, wanted families, didn't get them for a variety of reasons, or wanted a really flourishing career and didn't get it for various reasons. And they put that on themselves. They felt like a lot of internalized shame around having failed to do some or all of what they thought they were going to get.
Right.
And what I'm trying to do with the book is say, like, no, you came up in a context. It's not all on you. It doesn't mean that you screwed up somewhere along the line if you didn't achieve all the things that you thought you were going to achieve. Maybe the expectation was faulty.
Wow, I would agree with you. Even again, speaking from a male perspective, and I definitely understand the different dynamics. I've seen it. I've experienced some of it personally with the expectations. I know that for me, I was born and raised from boomer parents, and many of us in this generation either primarily had boomer parents or parents in the silent generation based on the age. But then see, back then in the 70s, people were getting married younger. And so a lot of Gen Xers actually have boomer parents too, just like the millennials, because it's changed. But I do know a lot of my friends that are in my age that are women. I would agree with you. And I say that because I sent this article, either I sent the article to them, or I actually found people that I knew that posted it on Facebook and what have you. And there was this one friend of mine, she's a Gen Xer, a woman. She actually lives in the city, and she posted the article or reposted it. And she didn't put a lot of copy in, you know how you put your copy in your perspective. The only thing she said was, "Yep, just about sums it up." Literally, and I still see it in my feed. She posted the article and it said, "Yep, just about sums it up." I mean, just period. So obviously there was some familiarity with that. But you're right. I think the expectations coming with Gen X women are different. A lot of what I do, in addition to this podcast, obviously from a professional standpoint, is really help coach people in this generation. I really want to help empower us, work with companies on their age diversity initiatives. But I tell you, as I'm a marketer, I have like an ideal target person or an avatar, and actually gave her a name. And you notice I said her because I have found that a lot of the people that gravitate toward what I'm doing happen to be more women, a lot of men too. But I gave her a name. Her name is Jennifer. And I said Jennifer.
Very good. A lot of Jennifers in this generation. Jennifers and Lisas.
Jennifer and Lisas. And the Gen X. So a little play on that. So Jennifer, she's 42 years old. She's married, but she's stressed. She's not happy with where she is. And that is so many of us, right? So many women in this age. You also mentioned in the book, which I love the stories, and you mentioned specifically that you talk to a tapestry of different women from backgrounds, races, ethnicities, sexual orientations. And I'm sure that was intentional, right?
Yeah, no, I really wanted it to look like America, because the one thing I'd noticed in some of the books I'd read about middle age was it was like one group of women in Brooklyn or in San Francisco, and it didn't feel representative and it didn't feel diverse. So that was a real goal of mine. Yeah,
I love what you said about you focus more on middle class, middle. And the upper class women, you said their stories have already been told a lot through these reality shows.
Yeah, like they've got the reality shows. They don't need my book.
And then the people that may not be as fortunate or not middle class are the ones that probably have so many other different dynamics. So you really gave some insight into that and why you want to focus on the middle class. And again, the middle class is often forgotten. Can you talk about and I know it's probably hard, like picking your favorite child. What are one or some of the stories that really stood out to you that just captivated you? I'm sure all of them did, not to play favorites, but can you just talk about a story that just really took you aback? And without, you can name names or not, it's up to you.
Yeah, it is hard to choose, but I would say there was this one woman in North Carolina, and I talked to her a few times over the 2 years that I was working on the article and the book.
Okay.
She had gone into a profession that was supposed to be stable. She was like a contracts analyst, and she had done everything right. She had bought a house as soon as she could afford it. She bought a house in a reasonable sized city that wasn't where she wanted to live. Like, she wanted to live in a big city, but she's like, no, I'm going to be sensible. And her whole life she'd been sensible. She waited to have kids until she felt like she and her husband could afford it. She wanted more kids, but she was like, nope, I'm just going to have the one because I'm going to be careful. I don't want to extend myself. And then she got laid off, and it was like she was doomed. I mean, it was the situation she was in was so hard, and they were having to live off retirement. And she had to put her kid into daycare, even though she didn't have a job, because they otherwise he would have gone onto the waiting list. And then when she did find a job, she wouldn't have had childcare. So it was like these situations where it was debilitating. And what I thought was so interesting about her was she was she had just worked so hard to do everything right and to be careful. And I heard that again and again from different women, but with her, I really felt like it was so clear that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to be smart and clever and hardworking and fair and nice and good. It didn't protect her.
Wow, yeah, that is a very interesting story, and I remember that one specifically. And there are so many other stories I'm sure that are like that. But you can hear and kind of envision. I mean, you heard it directly, the pain, but also the challenge, and the fact that particular story and that particular incident is shared by so many, in domestically across the world, because this is a phenomenon. And that's when I saw the article and I saw that it was then being turned into another book, which I was so glad, because obviously meeting someone like you who's also really trying to amplify and enlighten and empower and help this generation that's far too often overlooked, too often. But that's why we're here. Yeah. And I'm so glad for you to share those stories, because where there's pain, there's also progress. And I do know that you do take that step. Like, admittedly, when people see the book, they may think, oh my God, not again. I'm going to be reminded of the pain. And is this just a reminder for me to go buy 3 bottles of ZQL because I can't sleep? And you did a very effective and important job of, first of all, recognizing the crisis, because that's important, but then also kind of reframing the expectation that was set to us in the younger years when we were growing up watching Facts of Life with metal lunchboxes and paper bag book covers at school. And so I thought that was great. One thing also I wanted to ask you during the research process, Ada, because obviously you did a ton of research, and I believe you also use Pew Research as your dates, your years.
I went with those for the years of Gen X. They say 65 to 80. Yes. I mean, I think you could make an argument that it's earlier and later, but I like those. Yeah,
I typically use those too. I'm a generational geek. I remember when I actually read the book Generations by Neil Howe and Bill Strauss. I know they use. Oh,
I read some of it. I didn't read the whole thing.
Yeah, I know why. It's a pretty heavy read. I'm just crazy like that, but no. So they use 61 to 81, and I love the fact that you did reference their terminology with the 13th generation. But Pew Research, and I agree. I tell people all the time, around the edges of the years of birth, you can give or take. But if you went through high school without Google, you're probably a Gen Xer. If you know where you were when the Challenger exploded, when Hinckley shocked Reagan, during these different periods, you are a Gen Xer. But during this research period, Ada, I'm curious to hear from you. Was it frightening to see all these different data points, like the happiness curve, the pay gap, the stress? Like, was it almost frightful for you, as opposed to in addition to being therapeutic?
Some of the stuff that I did find scary and that I've seen play out in real life a lot in friends' lives is the stuff about women getting back into the workforce after taking time off. So any of and also just ageism in the workforce. The women I know in their 50s trying to find work either after a break or after a layoff. It is no joke. There are a lot of obstacles, and I found that scary.
Wow, that's great. That's very important to talk about. And I notice it, and I'm trying to do my part to help. And I think with this book as well is shedding light. Ageism is real, and you really don't hear that much about it. Like, it took for you to do the research, and it took me some time to kind of figure it out and understand it. Because we hear a lot about diversity and inclusion and some of the issues in the workplace. But ageism tends to be one that's not on the front lines or as illuminated as it should be, because for some reason I think it's kind of accepted. Yeah. Even from this okay boomer thing that's happening right now.
True.
What they call us, the Karens. The
Karens, right? Exactly.
The Karen. We joke about it, but when it comes to the workplace, it's a very serious issue, and that's why, like, I focus a lot, and I tell people, 40 plus, because you think about the Age Discrimination Act. It hits for people that are 40 and above, and a lot of women, especially, they're getting the double whammy. And if you're a woman of color, you're getting a triple whammy. And I know that you call that out a lot as far as some of the different dynamics. Let's talk about generations in general, no pun intended. I know that you participated in a panel at the Milken Institute And it was right after the article came out. And it was a great panel. You had different representatives there, including yourself, the gentleman who I think he wrote a book on Gen X.
Matt Hennessy.
Yes,
he has a lovely book about Gen X.
Yes. Matt Hennessy. And he's funny, by the way.
He's funny. He got some good jokes off.
He's very funny. And I know that it was brought up about even this idea of generations. And I've gone through it, obviously, for what I do. I have these conversations, and it's not to say what's right or what's wrong. I do believe that, the time and period that you did come of age does shape some of your expectations, not only on yourself, but by others. And like you and I can joke and talk about Bananarama and Cruel Summer, and we'll get it. But I know that it was brought up, not only do generations exists, but also, is there really a such thing as a midlife crisis? And I know that was brought up. What's your take on those questions and concerns? And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so there was a woman, as you'll recall, on the panel who is a sociologist. She's an expert in academia, and she said there's no such thing as a midlife crisis. There are studies proving there's no guaranteed dip in midlife. It's an excuse for bad behavior. That was what she said. Yeah, so she also, though, said that it is true that our generation is quite stressed out and under a lot of pressure. So my thinking there is, like, you can call it whatever you want to, but like the fact that you have a lot of people who grew up in Generation X who in their 40s are having a super hard time. Like, I like the term midlife crisis because I think it makes it sound like a big deal, and I think it is a big deal. And I respect people who don't want to use that term. I think it's totally fine not to use that term. But I think to say something like it's an excuse for bad behavior it's shaming, I think, because I think there are a lot of people I talk to who are trying really hard and working really hard, and they're not going crazy. They're not buying sports cars. They're not having affairs with, 20-year-olds. They're still showing up at work every day, and they're still making dinner every night, and they are good citizens. But the fact that they're having these existential crises in the middle of the night when they're laying awake, staring at the ceiling, I think you can't tell people that that's bad behavior. That's a very human response to a very stressful time.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, Ada, and I will triple down on that. I'll just seriously. I mean, I think it's important. It needs to be said, and I will say this. And I'm obviously, as a male, a lot of these dynamics and experiences I do share. Obviously, some of the things that are endemic and specific to women, I can't experience. But the stuck in stress phenomenon is real, and it's real. I mean, even for me, part of like why I launched the show, and this is just part of it, was because, again, I was starting to go through, I think I just turned 40, maybe a couple of years prior at the time. And I had just got laid off not about 3 years before. A family, happily married, kid. I have 2 kids now, but my son, who is 11 now, he was probably around 4 or 5. Just bought a house, just moved from New York to Atlanta. I lived in New York for 10 years, bought a new house. And I tell you, you talk about stuck and stressed.
Yeah,
it's amazing. It'll do it. And on top of that, I mentioned, I'm an only child. My parents, they're not spring chickens anymore. So as of right now, while I'm recording, I'm dealing with taking care with some health issues. And my parents, who are remote, they're away. They live in another city, and I had to drive there. I had to sign up to be power of attorney to make some decisions regarding nursing homes, and it's real. And a lot of people in this generation, we are battled, not in I want to be careful how I say this, but when I say taking care of our kids who we love and also our elderly parents, we're looking for work, and we're trying to make sure that we're bringing in enough money to be able to do those things and to be able to live the life we want to live. We're at the stage in this U curve where all of this in the traffic jam of life is happening at the same time. And if you are a woman on top of that, where the expectations are even probably greater or the opportunities are even less, then it's intensified. So for those who belittle the feeling of crisis, and I'm sure none of it is intentional, but you just have to be very careful, because we're at the age where a lot of these experiences are real. But at the same time, and this is where I do what I do, and I want to talk more about the opportunities, is first we recognize that these are the dynamics, but then how do we help come out of it? How do we adjust to where we are in this U curve of happiness, or I should say the U curve of crises or malaise? And how do we then redefine our expectations so we can become the exceptional generation and the leaders that we can be, and really progress and use the Gen X community as a support system to thrive at work and in life? Can you just talk about the goals and the things that you learned during this research and the new narratives that you want to set when it comes to Gen X women?
Yeah, well, I think it doesn't have to be the story of Generation X that we had terrible luck and we were doomed and we were crushed by responsibility. I think we had really high expectations for ourselves. The world did not entirely cooperate with all of our dreams, and we have been extremely resilient in the face of that. I think that you look at how much we've achieved as a generation, and it's amazing. And individually, you look at how much women have done and how many people we've taken care of and how much work we've gotten done, and it's amazing, and we should be really proud of ourselves. So I think that's where I would start with that. And I think that being able to appreciate the good things in our life without seeing only what isn't there is really key. There's one story that somebody told me that's in the book about getting into an Uber. I don't know if you remember the story, but like where this woman, she calls an Uber, it pulls up, she gets in, it's really dirty in the back seat. She starts handing the driver the trash from the back seat, and he's just staring at her. And she's like, "This day has already been terrible. What, you're going to stare at me? I'm helping you clean your car." And then she sees a woman on the sidewalk, and she thinks, "Oh, wait, this isn't my Uber." And then she sees the woman and man look at each other, and she's like, "Oh, this is not an Uber. This man was coming to pick somebody else up." It turns out it was his wife. And then so she gets out and says what happened. And like what happened then is so inspiring to me. I think about it every day. They all started laughing. Like the man started laughing. He told his wife what happened. She started laughing. And then the three of them were like laughing and thought it was hilarious. And I just think those human moments of connection, especially with other people from our generation who just get it and can see the absurdity in it, those are life-giving moments.
Yes. I remember the story, and I think that's such a great story to talk about. And again, it's all about how you reframe your expectation and think about what we have accomplished, which is so great that we're talking about this at this point in the interview, because we just discuss the real complexities and challenges and dynamics that we go through in mid-career, in midlife as Gen Xers. I mean, it's real. It's and if you think about where we are in our life cycle at this stage of our life, it's obvious. And also think about how we grew up. And but at the same time, what I tell people all the time is that we're the first generation that really bridged the gap between the analog and the digital. We had to, in our early phases of our careers, had to adjust to this new thing called the computer. We had to adjust to the internet. We had to adjust to moving from fax. We really had to learn and adapt. And I think what that allowed us to have these positive attributes that allow us to bridge gaps, to adjust, to adapt, to start businesses, to freelance. And if we work in the professional environment, if we do it right, be able to help manage the younger generations at the same time, understand the boomer perspective. And so I think from a positive perspective, and I say this all the time too, like you think about businesses that are starting, you mentioned this earlier as far as women, how they've done so well. From statistics and research that I've seen, the fastest growing startup founder is a woman who is around 45 or 43 to 45 years old. I mean, that's amazing. Now, unfortunately, they don't get the funding that they need.
Right. I know. I've read some books. There was a book by Julia Penzler about exactly that, where it's like something like 4% of venture capital funding goes to women.
Oh, it's horrible.
It's remarkable how low it is.
It's very horrible. I think it's even lower than that, maybe like 2 to 4%. And so I'm saying that the ideas and the grit and the fervor of starting businesses are happening at a higher level when it comes to Gen X's versus the other generations. That's statistically. Now, we do need to address the challenges of fueling that success with funding if they seek it, and there are gaps there. But think about people that are doing great things that are entrepreneurs, like the Sarah Blakeleys and Spanx. Like, she's a Gen Xer. You think about politicians or business leaders or what have you. there are Gen Xers that are doing great things, but in order for us to continue to progress and help other generations, we need to understand the data points that are in your book. And especially for women, we need to really understand how can we help champion their goals and dreams and reframe them. So I think that is so key that you're doing this. I could talk about this all day. Really.
Well, and I think it's so great also that you're looking at what people can do to help, and especially like employers. I think, I hope they're hearing these conversations and numbers and realizing that if you have employees that are under this much pressure and this much stress, then sending an email to them at 11:30 at night is an act of cruelty. Like, just let them have some time off at night.
Oh my God. That is so true. Like, you have to really think that is interesting. You have to think about the people that on your team and the differences. That's why, to me, generational differences, age differences, and expectations are important, because someone that, and not to say this negatively, but someone who's like in their early 30s or late 20s, send an email at 11 o'clock at night if they don't have family responsibilities, because I got to be careful, because there may be people that say, hey, I'm a millennial, but I have 3 kids. So how dare you say that I'm not as busy? Not saying that. But let's be honest. Sending an email to someone at 11 o'clock in their mid 40s who may have kids and they're stressed and stuck and whatever, if they don't respond immediately, don't chastise them, or based upon the tone of the email, don't add to the frustration. But that's why you should treat people as people.
Yeah. And
at the same time, understand that maybe your senior leaders and your people that are more senior leaders and experience in your job, they can bring something different to the table, and at the same time can have a different expectation. And so that's really, really important. I will tell you, this book is definitely a game changer. Before I let you go, and this is going to be fun because you're a Gen Xer, I have one final question that I ask all of my guests on Gen X Amplified. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So, Ada, if there was a song that would play every time you enter a room or when you walk down the street that perfectly fits you, your story, and the brand of Ada Calhoun, what song would that be? Basically, what would be your own personal theme song?
All right. So I think it would have to be by my favorite band, which is The Replacements. They're a fairly Gen X band, I think.
Yes.
And I'm going to go with the song Unsatisfied, because I have a very low tolerance for boredom, and I tend to do a lot of different things all at once because I get bored so easily. So I'm going to go with Unsatisfied.
That is such a great choice. Unsatisfied, The Replacement. Look me in the eye. Tell me,
you know it.
Tell me I'm satisfied.
There you go.
That's why I love this question too, because I always get to either remember different songs or get more into the personality. That is a great, great choice. Well, Ada, this has been a blast. I tell you again, I'm honored to talk to you. I think what you're doing is phenomenal. The Oprah.com article, I stumbled on it in my feed and I was totally taken aback. I clipped it. I bookmarked it. I read it. I don't know how many times. I shared it. And then I saw that you're now going to be writing a book and you got a deal from it. And I couldn't wait. I'm an Audible fan, so I've listened to it and I've read it.
Aww.
And I would take kudos to you. Kudos to your team, because for you to have the audible version so quickly, and it's you, not somebody else, which I can't stand that. I give you kudos, so thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for all you're doing too. I think people just don't pay attention to Gen X. They just forget we're there, and I think it's wonderful what you're doing to call attention to it.
I so appreciate it. That means a lot to me. We didn't even talk about, you probably saw this in your news article, which I joke about now, that I'm watching this interview on the news on some network, and they're talking about the different generations, and they put a graphic on the screen, and there's a graphic of talking about the years of the silent generation and the boomers and the millennials and the Gen Zs, and there was an entire 20-year gap or 15-year gap missing.
So funny. Nobody noticed. Think about all the producers who were like, "Yep, that looks good to me." I
know. I bring that up because I'm sure you saw it, and I tell you that moment. I said these words. I said, "See, this is why I do what I do." Yeah. But you know what? We're still here, even though we can't sleep. not take ZQL, read the book. Read the book. Follow Ada, everyone. Follow her. Read her other books. It's tremendous what you're doing. And please tell everybody in the audience, in the Gen X Amplified audience, how they can keep up with you, what you're doing, how they can get the book and stay attuned to your Gen Exceptional greatness.
Aw, thank you. Well, I'm at adacalhoun.com, and then I think the book should be available at all the bookstores, and it's definitely on Amazon and Audible. And yeah, I think it's at airports even this time. I've had a couple books come out. They have not been at airports. This one's at airports.
Oh, wow. All right. This is the airport. So all of you who are flying, going back, taking care of your mom or your dad, and they may not live out of town.
Exactly.
Read the book. Ada, thank you so much for spending time with me and our Gen X Amplified audience.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Take care. Yes. That was Ada Calhoun, author of the New York Times bestseller, Why We Can't Sleep, Women's New Midlife Crisis. Oh, I tell you, it's a page turner. It is a page turner, and I'm not a woman. I'm sure you know that, but seriously, it's so relevant, obviously, to women and the challenges and the different experiences that they go through in midlife, particularly as it pertains to their pain points and what have you. But I tell you, majority of the content spoke directly to me, and it can speak directly to you if you are a male Gen Xer, 40-pluser, midlife, even beyond Gen X, a boomer, older than your 40s or 50s, or maybe even younger. If you're going through a pivot point, if you're going through an inflection point, if you are feeling the traffic jam of life that is so correlated with midlife and mid-career, you definitely can get a lot of insight and knowledge from this book. Tell you, go get it. It's a great read. Why We Can't Sleep, Women's New Midlife Crisis, Ada Calhoun. Please check her out. And also check out genxamplified.com if you haven't already, to get the show notes and catch up with all of the other episodes that are here to empower you to thrive at work and in life as a Gen Exceptional leader that you are. But anyway, if you enjoyed this content, please, as always, like to ask if you go over to iTunes and give us a great rating and review so we can continue to spread the word of Gen X Amplified. And then remember, it is more than a podcast. This is a movement. Take care.